Hey, what's up, everybody? Good morning. It is Saturday morning, and this is Multi Family Unplugged. So glad that you're here today. I want to jump right in and just kind of talk about commitment, right? What are you committed to? I put a post out this week on social media, and I said, where are you at right now on a scale of 1 to 10 with your commitment? Your commitment around family, your commitment around spending time with your kids, your commitment around work, your commitment around education for yourself. We're all committed to something in different areas of our life, and what are you committed to? And are you so committed to that you burn with passion on it, in it, with it, and continue to grow? So, I just want to kind of leave you with that this morning as we get started and think about it, because I know my guest this morning is got some commitments that we're going to talk about, and what his focus is and what he wants to work on. So my guest this morning is Tim Little from Tampa, Florida. He's with Zana Investments, and great story behind that name. But he helps fellow vets invest in real estate or in passive real estate investment. So let's bring Tim in. Hey, Tim, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Good to see you. How are you?
You too. Good to see you again. I'm doing well.
Good. Thanks for your service, by the way.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that very much. Hey, listen, how did so I kind of mentioned in the when I introduced you that Zana Investments is the name of your two daughters. What are their names?
Zara and Lana. And so,
Yeah.
Whenever you're starting a business, you go through this, what should I name it? And you always start with these cliched, like, Greek gods or, something like that, Triton Capital or, Zorro's Capital, something that sounds very regal. But at the end of the day, I wanted something that had meaning to me, not just to the audience, because that's what's going to keep me going. You talked about commitment. Well, that's the source of my commitment, and it's a reminder of it every day. So it's a combination of my two daughters' names, Zara and Lana, Zana.
That's awesome. And those are both gorgeous names. I have to imagine that they are gorgeous little girls or adults.
Yeah. Right now they're 4 and 7. Next week they'll be 5 and 8. So still young.
I was taking the guess on the little girls, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so as we get started, one question I always like to ask my guests is, in one word, what best describes you personally and professionally?
I would have to say integrity. And that's because, integrity, everyone claims to have integrity, right? But for me, it goes way back to being an Army value. So it's one of the Army values, and it's stuck with me as probably one of the most important ones, right? There's duty, honor, selfless service, and those are all important as well. But if you do any of those things without integrity, if you run your business without integrity, then you've sacrificed everything.
Yeah. So if you had to put a definition on it, what would you say integrity is?
Yeah, and that's something we think about a lot. And I think integrity is, in its simplest form, is doing the right thing, even if no one's watching or even if no one will find out.
Yeah. It's you hear some different twists on that, but that's really what it is. I taught an ethics course for a while, and I started my course all the time by saying, if you were walking through a park and you finished drinking a bottle of water and you threw it at the garbage can that was in front of you and it bounced off the rim and hit the ground, what would you do? Would you pick it up, put it in the garbage can? Would you leave it lay there and just walk past it? And I think in some form that kind of comes down to integrity. How do you behave, whether you were with 2 or 3 other people or you were all by yourself?
Yep, absolutely.
Sure. So talk about you a little bit, your background, and your history and how you got into multifamily investing.
Sure. Well, it's a long and windy road, but started out. I went into the military straight out of high school, Army. did that for a few years and thought, this wasn't for me. I'm probably never going to go back in again, but had to do National Guard to finish out my commitment. So did that while I was going to school at Florida State. And then while at Florida State, an Army ROTC recruiter got to me and he's like, you got some background, might be good, empathy for leading troops in the future. And you get a guaranteed job, if you get commissioned. So that wasn't a bad deal. And so decided to, hop back into the Army again, this time as an officer, and did that for about 5 years until I decided to go ahead and take a knee after multiple combat deployments and went back to grad school. And after that, went into what I thought I was supposed to do, right? Go back to school, get educated, and get a good paying civilian job, work 20, 30 years and then retire. Because that's what I was taught was the way. But I wasn't really satisfied with that at some point. And I had been interested in real estate in the past, but just didn't really have the time, opportunity, or I felt money to start doing it. But then once I had a solid job again, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take action. And, I was listening to all the podcasts, reading the books, and I was like, I'm going to buy a property. And that was a big step, right? That biggest step is buying that first property, even if it's, a little single family property or a duplex. In my case, it was a duplex. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, which many people know is prohibitively expensive. So I had to look outside my area in order to invest, and found a duplex in Richmond, Virginia, just a couple hours away for $85,000, and put the down payment on that and decided this was going to be it. And, I had all the joys of, a little bit of cash flow, but I was also paying 10% to the property manager because I wasn't close enough to deal with the tenants and to get things done there. It was still, 3 hours away. And, all it takes is one event at one of those properties for your profits for the year to just evaporate, right? One tenant trashes a unit, or, the roof needs to be replaced, the hot water heater goes out. And if you were only getting $100 a month in cash flow anyways, there goes all that cash flow that you had for that year. So that started to get a little frustrating. And I wanted to scale, and I realized that I wouldn't be able to scale to my freedom number, which, I figured was maybe 50 units. And if I was getting, $100 per month per door, and there was no way I was going to get, 50, even 25 duplexes. It just didn't seem realistic. So that's when I discovered commercial multifamily and syndication. And that kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of getting these much larger properties by teaming up with a bunch of other people instead of doing it all on my own.
Interesting. Hey, I want to go back to that $85,000 duplex for a minute, how long ago was that?
So that was in 2014 that I bought that.
So, it's today that number sounds low, right? Well, yeah. You'd love to buy a duplex today for $85,000.
Oh yeah, I would love that. I mean, it was low even back then, right? But I bought in an area that was, I'll say less affluent within Richmond, lower income neighborhood. It was like 100-year-old house, one of these, big plantation houses that they basically just sealed up the stairwell from the first floor to the second floor and made them two separate units.
So what is that? What do you think that's worth today?
So I wound up selling it in 2017, I believe it was, like 3 years, almost 4 years later, for $150.
Yeah.
And that wasn't bad. And that was without a contingency for an inspection on like a 100-year-old house. So that definitely sweetened the deal.
It's crazy, right? I remember my first multifamily deal, and it was in 2005. It was an 11 unit. I think I paid $585 for it. And recently I noticed that it had just traded for like $1.1 million. So, it's amazing. And again, a neighborhood like you're talking about, right? Not the most affluent neighborhood, kind of a tertiary outside of Chicago. Just so it's kind of, here's one thing we know, right, Tim, is that real estate values continually go up. No matter where you get in, they will continue to go up. Do you,
Absolutely.
speaking of that, when you buy and you look at multifamily and you're buying a 50 unit or a 500 unit, are you buying for appreciation or are you buying for cash flow?
So I think cash flow is important. So it's both, right? It needs to cash flow so that we can provide returns to our investors. But there is also the expectation of appreciation, and so that's why you always want to buy in areas that already have good fundamentals, growth, right? Job growth, population growth, diversity of employers, so that the demand will continue to go up, therefore driving the value of that property up.
So a lot of my listeners are new, so I want to kind of bring just a little education component here. So when we talk about appreciation in the multifamily space, it's different than on the residential side. Residential just kind of organically goes up 2, 3, 5% a year, whatever is kind of happening in the market. But how does appreciation happen in multifamily?
Yeah, and that's the great thing about multifamily that I think a lot of people who are new to it don't really understand is you can force the appreciation. You can make it happen. You don't have to just sit and wait for it. And the way we do that is we find an asset, say it's an apartment building that's, from the 90s, right? Maybe the interiors are a little outdated, doesn't have a lot of the amenities that people expect these days. So we call that a value add deal because we know we can go in there, buy it, update it, renovate the interiors, maybe throw in stainless steel appliances, whatever is needed to bring it up to what the market expects and demands in that area, a dog park, Amazon lockers, whatever the case may be, and bring it up to the value that it should be. And what you do there is apartments are valued based on how much money they bring in, right? They're valued like businesses instead of houses. And I think that's the most important thing for people to understand up front. Comps make a difference, but they are valued based on net operating income. And that's just basically how much income they bring in. So if you're able to raise the rents by bringing these new amenities or doing renovations, then you're inherently raising the value of the asset of that apartment building.
So it's NOI driven, revenue driven, right? Net operating income. So I want people to be clear on that when they hear that. So what's your portfolio look like today?
Yeah, so we're really focused on Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Personally, I really like Atlanta. It just has a lot of those fundamentals that I was talking about in terms of, growth, a lot of businesses moving there, not just people. But when businesses move there, obviously they bring people with them, families, workers. And so there's a lot of population growth there as well. And I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So really big on Atlanta. But there's some other sleeper markets out there too, like South Dakota, that people just aren't really aware of because as places like Colorado get more and more expensive, anyone who knows anything about Denver knows that it has gotten really expensive in the past, say, 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. Well, those people need somewhere to go, but maybe they still want that Midwestern beauty of that area, the outdoor activities. Well, South Dakota is right there, and that's still relatively inexpensive in comparison to a place like Denver. So that's what we're really looking at right now in our portfolio. It's primarily Georgia, Florida, and Texas, but we are casting an eye on other areas.
So when you look at a market, so you can look at Georgia, you can look at Florida, but how do you drill down? Do you like every market in Florida, every market in Georgia? How do you pick your markets?
Yeah, and so like I said, for me, it comes back to the fundamentals. We want population growth. That's the first thing we look at. Is the population growing? Because a larger population equals more renters. Then we look at also job growth. Is the number of jobs in that area continuing to grow? And then job diversity is another one that's important that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about. So we've avoided like military towns, say, as an example, right? So a place like Fayetteville, North Carolina, it has what was formerly known as Fort Bragg there. So a ton of soldiers and their families. But what happens if that base disappears? Does that whole town disappear as well? And these are the kind of things you have to think about. And so, we look at areas that have several large employers, not just one that's holding up the entire economy for that area. Because obviously we don't want, huge layoffs that will affect our tenant base.
Yeah, that's interesting. We own some property in Huntsville, Alabama, and Redstone Arsenal is there, big Air Force base. And, there was talk several years ago that they were going to close it down. And this was before Huntsville got to be what it is today. And it was growing, but it was on the verge or on the brink of emerging. And, there was a lot of conversation in our boardroom about, hey, do we pull out of that market? Do we go into that market a little deeper? Because, if this Air Force base closes, we could be in trouble. So it's really important to look at that employment diversification.
Are you ready to skyrocket your investment portfolio and leave a legacy? Are you tired of inconsistent returns received in the stock market? Do you think it may be time to take a look at alternative investment options for your portfolio? Passive investing in multifamily real estate could be that option. With no tenants, trash, or toilets, providing a solid return on an annual basis that outperforms traditional investing, also receiving a monthly or quarterly return along the way. These lower risk and secure assets are a great hedge against inflation. If you want to learn more about these types of opportunities, you can email me directly to schedule a 15-minute consultation to see if you qualify. Just email me at mike@mikemorawski.com.
Yeah, and that's not to say that all military towns are in that situation, right? Some have busted out of that bubble and they've found that diversification. Colorado Springs is one great example, right? They have a lot more going on than just the base over there, Fort Carson and Peterson Air Force Base, etc. And then Tampa is another one. We have some huge commands here in Tampa, CENTCOM, SOCOM, and others, but no one thinks of Tampa as a military town because there's so much else here.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love Tampa is the diversification there. I own property 5 minutes from Adventure Island and Busch Garden, and so just even those theme parks bring a lot of people to the area, right? Speaking of Tampa, and to drill down even further, I mean, we could say Huntsville or we could say Tampa, but then you have to drill down into the market because there's the submarket, right? I know like Tampa, there's 15 submarkets and 3 of them I really wouldn't care to buy in, but the others, are at different levels. And are you getting that granular in your market research as well, digging into the submarket, or is it just macro market?
I think we dig into the submarket at the point where maybe someone's brought a property to us, right? A broker sends us a deal and says, hey, this apartment is for sale. And it's in, just like, again, take Tampa as an example. Well, we'll look at it and we'll be like, okay, where in Tampa is it? Because there's very different areas of Tampa. There's North Tampa, which is, closer to Busch Gardens and stuff like that. And there's some areas over there that, are just a little rougher, right? And then you got areas down by the bay that you couldn't afford anything even if you wanted it because of how high the prices have gotten. So very different dynamics going on there. So I'd say we do definitely get into the micro once we see a property. And so then we start looking at things like crime statistics and stuff like that, because the crime statistics make a lot more of a difference when you get to the micro level, because if you're looking at like an entire state, right, like that doesn't tell you a whole lot with regards to where that property might be.
Well, hey, and you bring up a good point about crime, right? I mean, you have crime everywhere. Sure. So is there crime? Do you not buy in an area because it's a little bit higher, or is there a certain type of crime that you'll stay away from?
Yeah, and that's where you get into the real granularity of, okay, what type of crime is happening there? Is it violent crime or is it non-violent crimes? We don't really want to invest in areas that have a lot of violent crimes, rapes, murders, etc. If there's things like theft, stuff like that, I mean, not that you want crime, but like you said, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So that's, I think, where we make that distinction between violent crime and non-violent crime. And then how often is it happening? And some of that can be even like block to block or neighborhood to neighborhood to understand which parts are really bad. So that's where you have to really drill down and start looking at, criminal reports and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I go back to that first property I bought, that 11 unit. I was so excited, right? I mean, it was my first deal, and there was nothing that was going to stop me. And we took it over and realized that the police were there at the property like 27 times a month. I always say in February, that's a perfect number, right? But, domestic disputes. And could have saved a lot of that headache if you just call the police department and ask, right? So.
Yeah. And not only that, the other great resource for that is the property manager. Right? If you have a property manager you're always already working with or that you're thinking about working with, call them up and say, hey, what is crime like at this property in this neighborhood? And they should be able to give you, a good on the ground answer.
Yeah. I love talking to my property manager about it, especially when we're looking to buy a property and you're there with one of the female employees of the property management company. And I think a simple question while you're doing your due diligence is, hey, would you go there at midnight by yourself? Mm-hmm. Would you be safe to go there at midnight by yourself? And, get their reaction, get their body language, get their comment. And I think it tells a story, right? It's all part of the story.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to go on the ground yourself because it gives you a completely different perspective on the area than some of the marketing materials that, say the brokers are doing up when they do their glamour shots of the property. You're like, oh man, this looks nice. And then you go and see it in person. You're like, this was not as advertised.
This is not what I expected.
Right. So.
Hey, so I know you syndicate your multifamily deals. You bring, your main focus is to bring fellow veterans in to participate in your returns. Talk about syndication a little bit and how that plays out for you today, and give your definition of what a syndication is.
Sure, and so the way I put it to most people is syndication is just a pooling of money in order to purchase an asset, right? And so that's what we do. You think of it as two different sides involved. There's the general partners, who are the ones who are doing all the due diligence, paperwork, et cetera, and buying and managing the deal and implementing the business plan. And then you have the limited partners, who are the folks who invest their hard-earned money with the expectation of returns, but they don't really have a say in any decision-making, and most of the time they don't want a say in decision-making. They just want to get their distributions and their nice returns, when that deal exits. So that's the baseline.
So when you bring a syndication to the market, what do you have a standard for yourself that you want to bring out for your investors on a return basis? What do you look for? What will you not go after as a, if you're trying to do an acquisition, what will you not go after if it doesn't produce X?
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of changing right now because we're in a very different market than we were, say, a year ago, right? Mm-hmm. So those numbers would have been higher a year ago, but again, with interest rates, being raised to the highest point, in however long, I think there needs to be an expectation of lower returns as well, just as a natural part of that process. Still looking at it though, I'm a simple man. And so I try to look at the most simplistic way of explaining it to people. And for me, when I was passively investing, that was the equity multiple. And the equity multiple is simply, how much will your money multiply over the hold period? So say you invest 100,000 and it's a 5-year hold. After that 5 years, when they exit, you should have gotten, if you got 100,000 on top of your original investment, so call it 200,000 total, then that's a 2x equity multiple. You've essentially doubled your money over the course of that 5 years. So that's one that I really like to explain to investors, and we really try for that 2x multiple. Sometimes it's closer to like 1.8, but we usually don't see it below that. And then some of the other metrics just get a little wonky for people who aren't familiar with it. So when we talk about IRR, internal IRR, internal rate of return, a lot of people just don't understand that. And if you've ever seen the formula for it, it's obnoxious. And so basically, the other one that I like to do is average annual return, because people understand what averages are. It's just that what that doesn't take into account that the IRR does is time, right? So there's, just like with the equity multiple, that doesn't take into account time. So a 2x multiple on a 3-year deal is great. A 2x multiple over 7 years, maybe that's not as attractive to someone. So you have to talk to investors, find out, what they understand and what their goals are too, right? Their investment goals. Maybe they're more focused on the cash flow. And so they're going to want to look at the cash on cash return on that deal. And maybe it's 7% cash on cash. So that's how much cash that deal is spitting out to them, over the course of the deal. But a lot of investors are just like, here, take my money. I don't care about the cash flow because they're not living off of that. Say it's like, for retirement or something. So they're more concerned about the long term. So they'll look at the equity multiple as the metric that they're focused on more so. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the different metrics, and it's really about aligning it with the investing goals of that respective investor.
Yeah. So what tools are you using today, or what's your method for raising capital?
Yeah, so I'm really active on LinkedIn, and I just try to provide a whole lot of value there, educating people on all this stuff because it can get complicated and convoluted. And I know how in the dark I was when I first got introduced to syndication. It didn't make sense to me because I didn't know it was a thing until I was introduced to it. And then I just had so many questions. So I try to put myself in that mindset and, provide that value to people on LinkedIn or through my emails. That way, hopefully people learn something. And then maybe one day down the road, they decide if they are going to invest that they give me a call.
Yeah. And do you get a lot of people calling you back?
I mean, it's hard to, just like anything with marketing, right? It's hard to assess where exactly the leads are coming from necessarily, because I also have a podcast. And people would tell me, oh yeah, I've been listening to you, for a while. And I'm like, really? Or Yeah, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while. And so you have a lot of people who are just, I don't want to say looky-loos, but they follow you, they see your content, and you're building that relationship, but you may not have even known that it was happening. And then, like I said, I try to reach out to the veteran community because when I was in, I don't felt like I got a lot of, financial advice. And so, I want to help that community out because I understand their needs, wants, desires, and fears. And I know a lot of them, especially when they move on to like their second career, if they've retired, they have extra money, and maybe they even have a couple of like single family properties that they've accrued over the years. Every time they moved for the military, and maybe they're tired of dealing with those single family properties just like I was, and are ready to move on to something that's a little more passive, but they don't know how to do that. And that's where I can tell them that, passive investing in multifamily is still an option because you get most of the benefits of investing in real estate, but without all the headaches of being a landlord.
Are there any other than LinkedIn, are there other tools that you use or platforms that you use that you really like to gain some, notoriety, call it, or are people interested in what you're doing?
Yeah. And so I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did, but my podcast, I get the opportunity to have, a lot of smart people like yourself come onto the show, and I get to share the stage and get some of that wasta, that energy onto me, and it builds legitimacy, right? And I found that I actually enjoy doing it, which I didn't expect when I started it. It seemed like a chore at first, right? Always having to do all this preparation and then do the interviews and then all the edits. But once I got some help with, the back end stuff, and I was able to focus on the conversations, then I found I really enjoyed it. And that's kind of starting to build up very quickly now. Before, I used to have to scramble to find guests for my show. Now it's at the point where people are trying to pitch me so much to come on to my show that I have a long queue, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is a very different situation. Yeah. But the nice thing about that too is you can use that content to put on Instagram and all those other platforms so that you're getting that message out to those completely different audiences, perhaps, than the ones that are listening to the podcast itself.
Yeah, very true. Have I been on your show?
You have.
I knew you were going to say that. Well, I asked. I wanted people to realize that they could go to your show and hear us on your show. So, hey, listen, what are you working on these days?
So I am actively raising for a deal right now. Can't talk about it, but and other than that, really just trying to underwrite as many deals as we can to find something that works. This is a market it's just the deals aren't as plentiful as they were before, and sellers are wanting more than maybe is realistic. So there's that back and forth that's happening as sellers, snap to reality. And so we're continuing to just put offers in and hopefully try to find our own deal. We've done a lot of code GPing, and all that means is partnering with other people who already have a deal in hand. But what me and some of my partners would really like to do is find our own deal, because obviously we get a bigger slice of the pie, but we control it. And that's important to us so that we can do what's best for our investors as well. If we're controlling the deal, then it's all on us, the good, the bad, the ugly, because, partnerships don't always work out. We've had partnerships where we weren't as happy with the lack of control that we had on those deals. So that's the direction we really want to move into, is finding our own deals and having others partner up with us to, help purchase it and enact that business plan.
Yeah. What's the investor sentiment today when you bring a deal to the market? So you obviously said that you're raising capital on something. I am as well. And what's your investor sentiment today?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are still a little, I don't know if nervous is the right word, just cautious, because they see so much going on in the economy writ large. Interest rates are up, chaos, this, that, and what I always see, and it drives me nuts, is commercial real estate in a downturn. And saying commercial real estate doesn't mean anything because it's inclusive of so many different property types that, again, saying commercial real estate just renders it useless. So you could be talking about a 100-unit apartment building, or you could be talking about a 1,000,000-square-foot, storage facility or something. Like it,
Sure.
it has no meaning, but people see these articles all the time. And I think they're not sure what to do with their money. Inflation has gone down a bit, but you're still not going to be killing it with a high yield savings account at 4%. It's better than losing money if inflation has in fact come down to that level. But otherwise, what are your options is what I tell most investors. You have the stock market, if you want to ride that roller coaster, but at the same time, I feel like real estate is much more consistent. We don't have huge ups and downs, and that's what's attractive to me about it, besides all the tax advantages and stuff like that.
Yeah. Great point. Great way to put that. Hey, I appreciate you being here today. As we start to wind down, I always like to ask a couple bonus questions. So what's the best book you've ever read?
So I know this is going to be a cliched answer, but I'm going to say Rich Dad, Poor Dad only because it's kind of stuck with me and it changed my mindset. I think that's really the point, right? I read it once and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I'll go buy a property, but then didn't. And I just wasn't in the right place, time, mindset for it. And so it took another decade before I read it again, front to back, and was in the right place and the right timing and everything else to actually put it into action. And that's so important. Like things need to line up, right? To really take the benefit sometimes of what we're reading, seeing, hearing.
Yeah, for sure. How about the best restaurant you've ever eaten at?
Again, that one's tough. I'll say the best restaurant that I've eaten in recently, which is Edison Food and Drink Lab here in Tampa. Okay. My wife consistently complains about the food scene in Tampa because it's just not as good as like when we lived in DC, right? Like there's such great restaurants in the DC area, such diversity. And so this was one of the best restaurants. We went there for our 9-year anniversary and she was finally impressed. So that was good. It just had really unique food, flavor profiles. Like one was like a very Southeast Asian dish, but it had it was a mango cayenne, like a mango pepper sorbet. So it was super spicy, but sweet at the same time and went with the rest of the dish. So just very unique. So if you're ever in Tampa, definitely recommend checking it out.
Cool. Nice. And then how about best tourist attraction?
This one is really tough because I have been to, I don't know, 20 something countries, and been all over the place. I guess the most unique tourist attraction that I went to was in Baghdad. It's called the Arch of the Ctesiphon, I think. And it's the oldest standing arch in the world. It's from the days of like Hammurabi. And so just to be able to go and see that, and at the time, as far as Baghdad was a war zone. This was, during combat, but we were able to go and see it. And it was like just being able to see a piece of history that old. Yeah. And then we saw a stand that had postcards there, and it was postcards from the 60s of like Americans coming to visit this thing, that of beauty that's so old. And it was like, man, I wish we could go back to those days where people could just, come to Baghdad and check out this amazing architecture. It was a lady with like cat-eye glasses, and a beehive hairdo coming to take pictures at it. I just thought it was so cool. And luckily, Baghdad's a lot better than it was in 2007, but I don't know if I'll be going over there for a tourist visit anytime soon.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, listen, thanks for being here. What would you leave investors with this morning, Tim?
Yeah, so I would just say, hey, if they want to learn more, I know a lot of the words and the jargon that we use in this business can be a little overwhelming and intimidating. So they can go to zanainvestments.com/cheat sheet. And there they can download my free cheat sheet, which is basically just, a glossary of the top 33 terms that I think they need to confidently passively invest in real estate. But I promise it's written in plain language, easy to understand terms, along with some examples to make it really easy.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Tim, I appreciate you being here today. I love your knowledge. I love your commitment, and you can hear the integrity in your voice, and I appreciate that. And I would encourage people to reach out to you if they're looking for an option for passive investing and somebody that they could partner with and